Good evening, I'm Mary Lahammer, and welcome to this Governor's Forum. It's a partnership between TPT and AARP. For the next hour, we're going to talk to the three leading candidates for governor about issues of special importance to Minnesotans older than 50. But many of these issues, the state budget, the economy, healthcare, are important to all of us. So don't go anywhere. The debate begins in just a few seconds.
Governor Debate, Older Minnesotans Speak, is a co-production of AARP, online at aarp.org/mn, and TPT's Minnesota channel.
Thanks for joining us, and a special welcome to those listening to this debate tonight on radio stations across the state. Let's hit the ground running. With us tonight are the three top candidates on the ballot for governor. They are here because each has received more than 5% support in an independent statewide poll. The rules tonight are simple. This is a conversation, not a formal debate. You won't see any podiums, no stopwatches, no Robert's Rules of Order. So let's get going. Here are the candidates in alphabetical order. Mark Dayton is the Democrat running in the race. He's a former U.S. Senator. Tom Emmer is the Republican on the ballot. He's currently a state lawmaker. Tom Horner is a standard-bearer for the Independence Party. He's a longtime Twin Cities public relations executive. Well, first question, gentlemen. Kind of the news of the week, we all got more details on each of your budget plans, and it all presented some hurdles, too, for you ahead. Let's start with you, Representative Emmer, because you released the third and final part of your budget. And one aspect that could be difficult going forward is cutting education, higher education in Minnesota. So how does a candidate for governor run in Minnesota saying you're going to cut education, specifically higher ed?
Well, actually, Mary, what we did this week is we put out the only balanced budget that has been presented. I think it's more than anybody, I'm told it's more than anybody's ever done in running for an office like this. We put out budget targets in every area of government. For instance, in the K-12 area, I know you talked about higher ed, we're adding $500 million. If you look at the
Your
budget...
Your opponents may differ with that depiction.
They might try to, but the reason they're going to differ is because you're really looking at two different ways of doing this. One, we believe that the state has to live within its means.
Right.
You have to start purchasing the services that people expect from government within the revenues that government has. And the reality is that the next governor, the next legislature, will have almost 7 to 8% more to spend than the current one, about $3 billion more.
How about specifically on higher ed, though? It's a $400 million cut. Isn't that fair? Is it going to mean higher tuition?
That is.
Is it going to be higher tuition for folks?
I sure hope not. I mean, we will challenge both the University of Minnesota and the MnSCU system. We will challenge them to work within what we're talking about and try to come up with efficiencies. The idea is to make sure that we all live within our means, not just one entity of government.
Okay. Senator Dayton, you also had the Department of Revenue run your tax increase plan, and it came up short, nearly $2 billion short. Tell me what you think you're going to do to fill that hole for the revenue. Are you going to have to increase that income tax more, drop down to lower earners, go to other tax increases, more cuts? What are you going to do to fill that hole?
Well, Mary, the reason that it came up short was because the income levels I set for beginning any tax increase would affect only the Department of Revenue set 3.8% of taxpayers in Minnesota. So,
do you disagree with that?
No, I accept their analysis, but it certainly others have said that this is about taxing the middle class, and in fact, it's clear that my proposal would not affect over 96% of taxpayers.
But are you going to have to dip down and affect the middle class?
Look for other sources of revenue. Look for additional cuts.
Okay.
And that's what I'm in the process of doing now.
What other sources of revenue? Sales taxes.
Well,
what other
one component.
Taxes?
This is raising the income tax rates. So we're looking at other ways of making taxes more progressive in Minnesota, and that's my commitment.
Other taxes.
And if I become governor, I'll work with the revenue and other authorities to find areas where we can continue to look to make revenues come in that are on a more progressive basis, and that's the real difference between myself and the two gentlemen here.
Are you committed to leaving your income tax increase proposal as is, though? Could it go up higher? Could you reach down lower?
The rate,
you will keep that
below the top rate in the country, which is 11%. These two scenarios we ran were 10.85 and 10.95%, but again, affecting less than 4% of all taxpayers, only the very top 4%.
Other taxes, you won't specify yet what you're looking at?
No, I'm looking right now.
Okay.
Let's see.
Speaking of other taxes, Mr. Horner, you've talked about other taxes, and this week you also came out with a jobs plan.
Right.
People mentioned that you didn't know how many jobs it would create, and you also got a little criticism for saying they were old ideas and that it wasn't out of the box for this third-party candidate who needs to be out of the box.
I didn't say they were old ideas. I think some of the folks from the Democratic and Republican parties have said they were old ideas. You know, it's a collection of good ideas that says that Minnesota is not going to grow. We're not going to have economic expansion if we're Johnny One Notes, if we just believe that we can cut our way to success or we can tax our way to success. So my tax plan says that we ought to encourage businesses to invest, and so the tax proposals I have in there are tax cuts that are paid to companies that are investing in research and development, buying new equipment.
Is that
the
new?
kinds of
Is that
things,
innovative? Is that out of the box?
It is the kind of proposal that people say will grow the economy. Now, where I do have some innovation is in saying that as a state, we ought to fund research at the University of Minnesota, at other 2- and 4-year schools. I've created some innovation funds so that we are open to
how
new
about
ideas.
Jobs? Do you have a tally yet on how many jobs, a
No,
ballpark?
but
on
look,
what it would
I
create?
mean, all of us have put out jobs programs, and none of us has been able to say specifically it will create this many jobs. You know, I think what Minnesotans have from the three of us, frankly, is a very good sense of how each of us would govern, of the priorities each of us would set. And in my case, I think that Minnesota needs to have a balanced approach. I think we need to make investments in education in the future and grow jobs that way.
Okay, we're going to talk more about the state budget in just a minute, but first let's hear from some Minnesotans on the topic. We went to the state fair a few weeks back to talk to voters about the economic issues they were most worried about. And here's what we found out.
I think it's important that the candidates are able to cross partisan lines to be able to solve the budget crisis and not really become entrenched in agendas in order to help frame the issue on the budget.
I think one of the things they need to do is look at cutting the taxes, lower the taxes, especially for businesses, and because the more money that's flowed into the community, everybody's going to come out ahead money-wise with it, I believe.
It's reality. If we expect services, they need to be paid for, and if it takes taxes to do that, that's the way it has to be.
Given the condition of the economy right now, I don't think raising taxes makes any sense at all. While the economy in Minnesota is nowhere near as bad as it is maybe in Arizona or Nevada, we still have trouble here, and raising taxes will only hurt that. We have to learn to cut spending, and we have to cut waste.
It would be nice to reduce some expenditures, and there again, unless you're right there with the books in front of you, you can't just off the cuff say, well, cut this, cut that, because you don't want to hurt people either.
I am very uncomfortable with extreme views on either end of the spectrum, and I believe that a win-win situation needs to occur for the populace to really benefit from any of the programs.
Is it going to increase taxes, or is it going to increase revenues, or what's going to go on? I'd like to know just exactly how he's going to balance the budget.
Okay, let's talk taxes more here, and specifically how some of the tax impact could hit folks over 50. That's the focus tonight. Let's start with you, Tom Horner,
Sure.
and your plan to tax services, sales tax on services.
Well, but keep in mind, I mean, the overall plan is lower the tax rate so that those people buying big ticket items, appliances, furniture, actually are going to pay a little bit less in sales tax. And then, yes, I would expand it to clothing and services, not business-to-business services, some personal services. That's in line with other states.
How about those personal services? Might seniors use more personal services? Could it affect them disproportionately?
No, I think it's going to affect everybody fairly.
Okay.
Because I do have $350 million in there to make sure that we're not taxing low-income, middle-income unfairly. You know, my budget says, look, we're all in this together. We're all going to have to share a little bit of the sacrifice to dig out of the $6 billion hole that is being left to the next governor. I think that's the responsible way to go.
Representative Emmer, you're going to be cutting local government aid, and Local government aid cuts under Governor Pawlenty, many say, resulted in property tax increases. Could property tax increases disproportionately hurt seniors and folks over 50?
Well, you asked me two different questions. I mean, if local units of government are going to insist on giving raises that are out of line with the private sector, I mean, I ask people all the time, Mary, when I go in, how much of a raise did you get this year? And most people say, I didn't get a raise, or I don't have a job, or
But a lot of mayors are saying property taxes could go up under your plan.
But hear me out. I hope you will. That when you have people in different cities that are giving their public employees 3% or more increases at a time when we're suffering, we got to look at what local government's doing. And please, when we talk about local government aid, what I proposed was this. I don't know how many of your viewers understand that only about half the cities in this state get any local government aid, and frankly, only a handful get the lion's share. What we've proposed to do is make sure that local government aid applies to those things that it was intended to in communities that can't support services like police and fire, sewer and water infrastructure. That's where it should be. It should be categorical. That actually will benefit cities right now that are not getting in.
But property taxes could go up as a result. Is that fair?
That's a local issue. No, I don't think it's fair. To connect the two, it's not fair. I think those mayors that say that need to take a hard look at their budget. As the only one up here who sat on a city council who's been through this, I can tell you that is a decision for the local unit of government. Many cities right now, Mary, are budgeting without any local government aid. And again, we said it should be categorical. Government should provide for public safety, for fire protection, for sewer and water infrastructure. Those communities that don't have that economic ability will get that aid.
Senator Dayton, you know you're going to have to retool your revenue plan and find, that $2 billion hole. How could that affect seniors? What other taxes are you looking at? And the income tax, seniors could be affected by the income tax too.
On the upper income. And again, my proposal affects less than 4% of taxpayers, and there might be a few wealthy seniors who will be asking to pay a little more or some more. But, the large middle class of people and seniors who are limited on fixed incomes are not going to be affected. And with all due respect, I think property taxes inevitably going up as people learned under Governor Pawlenty. I mean, the Department of Revenue, which we've agreed is our authority, says for every dollar reduction in local government aid or county aid, property taxes go up by 67 cents. So property taxes go up. That's the most unfair tax. Again, the Department of Revenue says the middle class pays about 5 times more as a percent of their income in property taxes than the wealthiest people in Minnesota. And the sales tax, they pay about 2.5 times more. So, my commitment is to make taxes more progressive. Are you ruling out the sales tax,
though? Are you willing to rule that out?
It's a regressive tax.
So you're not going to go to the sales tax?
Right now, the Department of Revenue, again, says that the best off people in Minnesota pay a smaller percentage of their income in state and local taxes than everyone else. That's the definition of a regressive tax system overall. So just to make it fair, just to even it out, so the wealthiest people are paying the fair share, the taxes need to be made more progressive, not more regressive.
Okay, let's open this up a little bit. Each of you talk to an opponent here and point out or ask a question about some of the flaws or questions you may have about each other's budget plans, now that it's out there. Who wants to jump in? This is an opportunity.
Well, I have a question for Representative Emmer, just following up on the last comment. I mean, you were charged during the primary campaign, or during the endorsement campaign by your opponent, that when you were a member of the Delano City Council, that you voted for a 16% increase in property taxes, and specifically said this is a result of cuts in state funding. Were you irresponsible as a city council member?
I tell you, when you look at numbers, and you should probably go look at them, Tom, I don't know whether you know the numbers you're talking about, whether they're real. You might want to go back. You might want to go back and look. Yeah. It was exactly the LGA issue that we're talking about. And guess what? As a member of the city council in the city of Delano, we did exactly what we were supposed to do. We were very responsible with the budget, and that's what cities need to do right now.
Property taxes,
so
16%.
Here's what I would send back to both of you.
Well,
it's great to talk about numbers, but you're short in your budget, Senator, by about $2 billion. You've been very gracious, acknowledging that you've got this big hole and you got to figure out how to fill it. Mr. Horner, you've got about a $2 billion hole in your so-called budget as well. I put out a balanced budget that lives within our means. The state government and the state of Minnesota will have roughly $33 billion to spend in the next biennium. We have made the hard choices.
Okay, and what's your question?
So
We have made the hard choices, and we've put out a budget that's balanced. I've showed people, put our cards on the table, and told the citizens what we're going to do. I'm asking you guys, where are you going to cut? Because all you're telling Minnesota right now is these are the wonderful things we want to do for you, but where are you going to cut? Is it public safety? Is it the judiciary? Where are you going to cut?
So is the answer that, yes, you did propose a 16% increase in property taxes?
No, I answered it. We balanced our budget the way we were supposed
to. With the 16% increase in
I don't believe that there was a levy back, but no, you've got that wrong.
Well, that's what I'm asking. So could you correct that? How much of an increase was there in property taxes?
Don't remember. It was minimal in terms of what the citizens of Delano paid, but here's what it was. It should be for police and fire services, Tom, and if you look right now, City of Delano does not get any local government aid. What does the City of Bloomington get? What does Edina get? Do you know?
No, but I think that we ought to have local government assistance in a way that delivers core essential public services, helps those communities make sure that they can deliver services.
Now,
but I also believe, Representative...
We agree, because what he's talking about is core services being police, fire, sewer and water infrastructure. In Minneapolis, do you have any idea, Senator, how much Minneapolis gets in local government aid?
They're a large recipient of it. They're I think, the largest numerically, although, of course, they have the largest population.
Very much so. And what are they talking about cutting?
Let me just finish up here, because according to the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, 40% of their member communities before the 2010 cuts had to make cuts in fire and police. So at the level...
Why, Tom? Why?
Because they weren't getting enough assistance, Tom, because the economy was down.
Why would government ever cut police and fire instead of cutting golf courses, instead of cutting
property taxes,
luxuries? Why would you do that, Tom?
You
police and fire is
and
number one.
I think that's the point, Representative Emmer, is that they
Senator Dayton, doesn't this look like so much fun? You want to get in,
that
Senator
they got
Dayton?
to the point where there were no more luxuries left, that they don't have those luxuries, that they're having to cut fire and police services.
Let's be honest about what we're talking about.
Senator Dayton.
Well, I give Representative Emmer credit. Finally, about 140 days after he was endorsed by his party, he came forth with a budget, and I give you credit for your candor.
I appreciate
and I will be following suit next week with more. My dilemma is, and you were, to your credit, honest about the cuts you're making, but I just think they're drastic cuts. 14% for higher education, K-12 education. You talk about an amount of $500 million, but there are going to be 10,000 more students in our public schools, kindergarten through 12th grade, over the next 2 years, and so the actual per student cut there is even greater. And we're talking about health and human services. That's another area where you've made I believe about a 19% cut. And as we'll get into some of this, these numbers I have, but you can glad to see yours, because over half the Department of Health and Department of Human Services budget goes for medical assistance and for the elderly and for long-term care. And as we'll get into, I assume, if we're talking about some of those services, the state and both parties and Governor Plenty have done a lot and made a real effort to keep those costs down and make those services cost effective. And the reality is that as our population ages, more and more elderly citizens need those services. So, these are tough problems. None of us created a $6 billion deficit. Whoever's governor, the legislature is going to have to solve it. There's no easy, simple way. And to pretend otherwise, and to pretend that any of these cuts are not going to have serious consequences for real Minnesota citizens' lives, I think is just not the case.
What are the consequences? Tell us, what are the consequences, though, for Health and Human Services? People are going to lose eligibility, aren't they? Is that going to happen?
No, that's not what's going to happen.
Nobody's going to lose.
We can't say that because of the federal play. There's going to have to be waivers likely applied. But here's the problem, and I think the public needs to understand, because we really are at a fork in the road. You can either go the way that these two gentlemen suggest, which is the way we've been doing. You can either continue to raise taxes, whether it be more sales taxes or whether it's different taxes on which are respectfully, Senator, going to hit the middle class. You can either continue to, respectfully, they are.
You don't mischaracterize my proposal, and I won't mischaracterize yours.
Regardless, you're going to raise taxes. We can agree on that. You're going to raise taxes in order to pay for more government. Here's the problem. Senator, when you say that I'm cutting health and human services, in fact, the budget we put out has $650 million more in health and human services than this state is spending today.
But
and
to
here's
accommodate the growth that's there.
Well, but there you go.
Right.
To accommodate the growth that's there, you haven't addressed the fact that health and human services is scheduled to grow by 32% in the next biennium.
Right, but does that mean you're going to be turning people away as more people lose health
We've already
care?
identified it. Should be your priority should be children, vulnerable adults, seniors. That's who you should be taking care of
They
with
won't
these
lose
programs.
coverage.
That is the goal.
Okay.
Hold them harmless. But here's what we've got to talk about, Mary. If you're not going to make decisions as to how you're going to reform these programs and hold the line, live within our means, health and human services alone, if it grows at 32% every 2 years, will eat up the entire state budget by 2020. And if that happens, then there will be no money, no matter what you do, for K-12, for roads and bridges, et cetera. It's time the government live within its means.
Quick comment, Representative Emmer. You are going to raise taxes. You raised taxes when you were a Delano City Council member. A couple of weeks ago at Game Fair, you agreed to raise sales tax.
Oh, that's not true. Where are you coming up with that?
You tore up the bill that said you opposed it.
Sales tax, sir. That's not true.
You did support the sales.
You've got to be honest with folks. I've never done that.
Now are you rejecting the sales tax increase for the legacy amendment?
We talked about the legacy amendment, but we're not raising any more taxes, Tom.
But you did agree to raise that tax, right?
Tom, you heard what we did.
You did agree to raise that tax?
No, we're not raising any taxes.
So now are you rejecting that tax?
Did you vote for the legacy amendment?
I didn't vote for the legacy amendment, but it passed. It passed, right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's already law, and that's what we're going to live with.
The issue is they presented you with your bill to repeal the legacy amendment. And you said, I no longer support this.
The legacy amendment is in law, sir.
Right. And you were going to try to repeal it.
The legislature will have to address issues, sure. But
we will talk
you
some more.
did support a tax increase for the legacy amendment.
All right. We want to move beyond the state budget now and talk about some other economic issues. To help us do that, let's go back to the state fair and find out what Minnesotans had to say when we asked them about jobs.
I'm employed. We just moved up here from Chicago about 14 months ago, but my wife's had a real hard time finding work. And I know people in other places are having a lot more trouble right now. I think the best way to find jobs is to be competitive.
Well, I see the biggest challenges right now are the fact that I spent many years in the corporate world coming up from the bottom and never actually got a degree. So it is a struggle to see how going back at this point would be a benefit.
With my family, I've been fortunate in that I think it's more underemployed. They're working at jobs that aren't really the right one. They've graduated from college and they can't find a position in their selected field.
The people I know, one is a hospital worker, another is in the medical field. Both of them lost their jobs. Both of them are trying actively to get back. Specific fields, they can't get hired because corporate has taken over some of those responsibilities. So they're looking at jobs that are much less pay than previous and reduced benefits.
Well, of course, just growing our economy is the most important aspect of making sure that we can find full employment. I think the role of the next governor is going to be critical in helping do that.
The other problem is age, and there is no age discrimination legally, but let's face it, in the real world, that can be a challenge too.
Okay, Senator Dayton, take this one first. When we hear about folks trying to find work, it seems like those older than 50 are having a harder time, that are laid off or have lost their jobs, finding employment. What will you do as governor to help them get jobs?
Well, it's a problem facing everyone, Mary. It certainly affects those older 50, but it affects young people coming out of college as well. You know, I had the opportunity to work for the last really great jobs governor from Minnesota, Rudy Perpich, coming out of the 1982 recession. And, you know, he was a proactive jobs governor, as I intend to be. And in the short term, $1 billion bonding bill next year. Star Tribune and others have editorialized with interest rates low. This is an opportunity. Studies say that $1 billion in public projects creates 28,000 jobs in the private sector.
Can we afford that?
A multiple effect.
To borrow $1 billion?
Interest rates are as low as they are, and we rank very low among the states, to our credit, in having in our debt ratio. And the stadium is another 8,000 jobs over 3 years, putting people back to work there. I propose an energy savings fund.
Sounds like you're going to do a Viking stadium then?
I'd like, yes, if they can make it a People's Stadium. No, a People's Stadium. That'll be in the best interest of the people of Minnesota for the economic benefits compared to the cost, and it would not come out of the general fund. But my energy savings fund takes example from the University of Minnesota Morris, where they've retrofitted the buildings for more efficient energy use. That creates jobs. Retrofitted the heating and cooling system to use alternative energy. They're buying corn stalks from area farmers, puts money into the local economy, pelletizing them, gasifying it, save $1 million in energy costs. We had to replicate that kind of approach with every state college and university building in the state, and then go on to state government, local government, the schools in and around the state, and we could transform the public sector's use of energy in our state, put people to work in those projects, save the taxpayer energy costs, and bring that alternative energy industry to Minnesota for the future.
Okay. Tom Horner, we talked about your jobs plan
Yes.
earlier. Can you specify of how it's going to help older folks, people over 50?
Absolutely, because part of what I'm proposing is that we strengthen higher education, and particularly our two-year schools, and we tie them in directly to the regional economies, into businesses. That's what the opportunity to provide lifelong learning, to give people new skills, but also to create new jobs with the local industries, and it's jobs that are appropriate to the population that people have.
And how are those folks going to be able to afford to go back to school?
We're going to have to provide some way to make them to make it affordable. Part of that is how we as a state decide to fund our two-year schools so that it is affordable. We can't afford to leave 50, 55-year-olds out there and just pull the rug out from under them. So part of it also, though, Mary, is we need to make employing people affordable. And so we do need to manage the cost of health care. And when we undermine the cost of health care, when we leave people vulnerable to health care, force them into emergency rooms, I mean, the same kind of thing that's happening now with the general assistance medical care, where people are forced into emergency rooms. The hospitals are required to take them.
Too.
But that cost gets shifted to the employer. That makes it more expensive to hire people. So we have to have a responsible health care program for everybody in Minnesota that does keep health costs affordable, that does make it possible for people to hire, for employers to hire older workers.
Representative Emmer, how are you going to create jobs, and especially for that over 50 crowd? Does the tax cut do that?
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's
How
several.
does it do it?
I'll explain it, but I just listened to my colleagues, and they have great ideas. They want to put money into government projects. They want to invest in higher education, all kinds of things that are very laudable. But if you don't create jobs, if you don't have a growing, vibrant private economy, you can't do any of these wonderful things that we're talking about. And I think that's what it's all about. You don't wait to do these tax policies. You do them right away in 2011. And you get it moving.
But does it take a while to take effect and help the budget?
I'm sure it'll take a little bit of time, and I'll help Tom a little bit. You were asking him about how are you going to calculate jobs. Well, I don't know. It's only government people that say how many jobs you're going to create, because we know government doesn't create jobs. People create jobs. You need to give them an opportunity in the marketplace and their own resources, give them the ability to create those jobs, and then sky's the limit. It's up to them if you will free up the entrepreneurial spirit.
Bonding bills and construction projects create jobs, and
Mary,
that's government.
And that's why I said the senator, that's laudable, but if you don't have a growing private economy, if you don't create an environment with lower taxes, with less regulation, or streamlined anyway regulation, so that existing businesses can start to grow again, start to hire again, and so that new investment, private investment, can come into the state of Minnesota. If you're not growing your private economy, you're not going to have the funds to pay for all these wonderful things that these gentlemen are talking about.
You haven't liked any of the bonding bills so far. Is there a bonding bill, which a lot of Democrats call jobs bills? Yeah. Is there one you could support as governor?
Absolutely. And if you look at the budget that I put out, it's for infrastructure and emergency issues, and it is in the budget.
Does that create as many jobs if it's infrastructure and emergency?
I think that right now we've been focusing all on bonding bills, and there is a place for bonding, especially for projects of statewide and regional significance with capital long-term improvements. Absolutely. But if you're going to pay for those, if you're going to pay the debt service, if you're going to pay for the services that you want to purchase from government, again, Mary, you have to start growing jobs again in the state of Minnesota.
But here's the problem. I mean, what Representative Emmer, with all due respect, and I do admire that you've put out a budget, and I think all of us have put out a lot of good information for the people to see and evaluate. But what you're really proposing is the last 8 years on steroids. And the problem with that is that in the last decade, in good years and bad, Minnesota has lagged the nation in job growth. We're not growing at a rate as fast as we need to. We have economic opportunities that are leaving Minnesota. And yes, we ought to be concerned about every job that leaves, whether it's to South Dakota or any other state. But what we really ought to be concerned with are those good career, cutting-edge economy jobs that are going to Wisconsin, that are going to other states, that are going to other countries. And they're doing it with the research that is being created at the University of Minnesota, with the talent pool that is being educated at our Minnesota schools, and then moving out of state. That's what we can't afford. We need to maintain, excuse me if I'll just finish. We need to maintain a healthy education system at the higher level, at K-12, because long-term, our distinctive advantage, what will grow the good jobs, will be our talent pool, and we need to make sure it's the best in the nation.
Tom, you know that the last 8 years, what we're proposing has not happened at all. You know, and I know that your job has been representing people, influencing government. You've worked on rail projects. You've worked for hospitals, influencing government. So you know the problems that they face. We're proposing taking the corporate franchise tax and reducing it by a couple of points, which will put $363 million into the pockets of our employers.
Okay.
That hasn't happened in the last 8 years.
Let's hear from
that
Senator
will allow
Dayton.
them to hire
He's
capital improvements. Well, but this is important. I think when you make an
about
allegation,
fairness here,
well,
too,
and
and
fairness
getting
should
people
be,
in.
Well, that's fair. I'll be quiet.
Okay, Senator Dayton.
Well, I wanted to emphasize, agreeing with Mr. Horner about the importance of higher education, all of education certainly, but reestablishing the University of Minnesota's excellence in key areas that are going to be crucial, whether it's scientific research that led to the taconite industry,
How
or
you do
whether
that?
it's
Is it
a
just
spin-off.
money?
Well, we need to reestablish excellence. You know, when the University of Minnesota Medical School, I applied to medical school my senior year in college. Unfortunately for the profession, I changed my mind. But back then, Minnesota was in the top 8 medical schools in the country. Now we're ranked 12th for primary care, which
How
is
did
okay.
they get back up there?
30th for research.
Yeah.
You know, it's it's investment. It's looking for federal resources. It's getting the private sector to collaborate and come in. It's sitting down with the new president of the university and saying, where are we going to? What are the strategies we need so that we can be the best in things that are really going to pay off for the future of Minnesota? That's the mandate for a land-grant institution such as the University of Minnesota. Minuscule campuses, especially in greater Minnesota, have the same role to play. And educating our young people and older people who go back to school so that they can be trained and ready for the jobs of the future is the key role of education. And those are the best paying jobs. Well-educated people are going to have higher paid jobs.
Now, higher
and Mary,
education.
to your point, though, I mean, to say, is it just money? In some cases, it is money, and we need to be honest with Minnesotans. We need to say that we do need to make investments. We ought to fund research at the University of Minnesota and other 2- and 4-year schools. We ought to make college affordable. We ought to make sure that we have the best educated talent pool. Do we need to do it wisely, efficiently, smartly? Absolutely. But when we stop making investments in the future, we will be a state on the slide to mediocrity.
But if you're going to be honest with Minnesota, you should tell them what taxes you're going to raise.
I think I have.
No, you haven't told them at all.
And if I haven't, you have.
Shortfall.
Okay, tell us a little bit more. Can you specify what services, for instance?
Well, no, I mean, he was asking me about the tax proposals.
Yeah.
I've been very clear. We're going to lower the rate on the sales tax, broad and base.
What taxes are you going to raise? And if you're not going to tell Minnesota the $2 billion hole that you have.
What taxes am I going to raise? We're going to lower the rate on the sales tax, broaden the base to include clothing and some services. I'm going to close some tax expenditures, some of the deductions and credits that go to the wealthy, because I do agree there needs to be some more equity and fairness in it. We are going to increase taxes on tobacco and alcohol.
You're going to tax garage sales?
No.
You're going to tax the
garage
kid.
Sales aren't taxed now.
You're going to put a tax, right? But when you do this,
occasional
your
sales
service tax,
occasional sales
it would have to be included to get you your $2.15 billion in new taxes.
The only reason we ought to worry about, I'll tell you, the only reason we ought to worry about garage sales is if you guys get your plans through for all the people who will be leaving Minnesota.
Okay.
How about
let's broaden our discussion here to the last half of the debate.
The kid who mows my lawn?
Excuse me. Taking a look at some of the other issues of importance to Minnesotans over 50, for example, health care and long-term care. Let's take a look at what you had to say on those topics.
The focus on tomorrow is very important to me, and I would hope that they would have a long view and not look at just short-term opportunities.
One of the biggest challenges that we face is really being able to invest in the future of an aging economy, and it's a big issue.
I guess I would like to know what policies they would propose to protect Minnesota citizens from frauds and scams.
I do think it's important that everyone have health care and pay into the pool, though, because we have this situation where people can game the system, not have health care, and then walk into a hospital and expect the taxpayer to pick it up. And that's not fair to those of us who play the system legitimately.
Preventative health care, so it's not emergency room. People are being served, but they're being served at the highest cost.
Education over the state is falling off that pinnacle that it once had. And education is very dear to me, very dear to me.
I want a governor to lead in a progressive manner, to get some of the issues that people are concerned about settled and solved. How do we age in dignity? How do we educate our kids? How do we save for retirement? Those kinds of things.
Okay, let's take health care. Representative Emmer, I think you're the only person up here who said they would not opt in to federal health care. Tell us why not, and what other federal programs would you turn down? What other sources of money do you not want from the Fed?
Well, at the last part, the hypothetical, is inappropriate. I think every new program that is sent to Minnesota by Congress should be evaluated. The next governor, the next legislature, and going off into the future should always be doing the due diligence and evaluating what is Minnesota getting versus what are we obligating future Minnesotans to support.
But you could turn down other sources of federal money. You're open to doing that besides
I think you got to evaluate everything, and I won't give you a yay or nay. Again, every program has to be evaluated on its own merits. What are we opting into, and what are the long-term financial liabilities for the state of Minnesota? Because obviously, if you're taking on long-term financial liabilities that you may not be able to pay for, you shouldn't be accepting those until you understand what those ramifications are. And then with the early opt-in, I mean, I know these gentlemen feel differently, but it's $430 million over the next 3 years, number one. That's what it's going to cost this state. Number two, if you look at the way Minnesota has innovated, Minnesota has figured out how to provide high-quality care at a low cost. Unfortunately, the federal program doesn't reimburse us based on that, based on high quality, low cost. Instead, the federal government reimburses based on volume of care. I don't think that's the right answer for the future of Minnesota, in addition to the financial liability and problem that it creates.
Okay, why opt in if it's going to cost us money, is it?
It's a net $188 million because it offsets in other areas that the legislature and the governor provided for in the budget for the next biennium. That would bring $1.4 billion, more than 7-to-1 return for the state. That would, and 3/4 of Medicaid spending goes for the elderly and people with disabilities. So this is going to provide better quality medical care to the elderly and to people with disabilities throughout the state, and it's crucial to the rural hospitals. Why has the Minnesota Medical Association called for this? The Minnesota Chamber of Commerce called for this. The Minnesota Hospital Association called for this. I mean, these are private sector people who understand that money is essential, especially in greater Minnesota, to the financial stability of these hospitals and their ability to provide good quality care for everyone.
Let's jump back here, because if hospitals opposed it, Chamber opposed it, Representative Emmer, those are groups I assume you'd want on your side, and they're not on this.
Oh, absolutely. Well, they will be. I mean, while I have a lot of respect for the senator, I think you might want to check these numbers too, because what you're suggesting is just simply not true.
It came from the
in the
Minnesota
long term,
Medical Association.
Unless you're, well, no, I can,
the Minnesota
because
Health Association. They wrote the editorial. It said $188 million net
finish,
cost.
I will. You better check those numbers. I mean, much like the so-called budget that you put out, the numbers you're given right now don't add up. That's not what's going to happen. And frankly, if you're going to lead, this time, let's stop doing things automatically the way we've been doing them, because that's what you're proposing. If you do this, even if you were right, and I'm respectfully submit you're not, even if you were right, we'll be right back in this soup within 4 to 6 years, and then you'll be talking to the good people of the state of Minnesota, to our hospitals, to the MMA, all these different interest groups, and saying, now what do we do? Why don't we solve it right now, structurally going forward, so that we can get on the right path?
And I couldn't agree more. We do have to change how we do things. And to not take the opt-in, it's really not. I mean, I agree with you that we ought to do the opt-in, but not so much to get the federal dollars, but to do healthcare well. Because what we have been doing and what we do need to change is exactly what we saw with general assistance medical care, the healthcare program for low-income people that Representative Emmer and others tried to abandon and push away. And the problem is that when you just do that, you don't save money. You just transfer that money. You transfer it to hospitals. You transfer it to property taxpayers in Hennepin County who now have to pay for HCMC because the people who need care are coming into the emergency rooms. And as a former employer, I know that you also transfer it to insurance premiums. You transfer it to the cost of business. You transfer it to the cost of health care purchasers. And most of all, what we've done in Minnesota and what Representative Emmer and I think Senator Dayton in their budgets proposed to continue is that we haven't really addressed some of the most significant structural costs, and that is how we just keep transferring the cost to providers. And so we ask nursing homes, deliver care for less than your cost.
Okay.
We ask hospitals, doctors, dentists, deliver care for less than your cost. Yeah, it looks good on paper, it looks good in your budget, it's not real cost saving.
How are you going to really save costs in health care?
Absolutely correct. And the reality is, again, I mean, these are, nursing homes, 51 have gone out of business in Minnesota since 2001. We're under reimbursing nursing homes, and yet that's one of the ways the legislature and the governor have tried to keep costs down. We have, gone from 88% of our long-term care costs in nursing homes to 71% by using elderly waivers for in-home care for seniors who want to stay in their homes. And yet, the cost of that's going up. It's still less than half of the cost of a nursing home. So, some of these things have been taken, and the reality is, we've gone from about 8,000 people in 2006 and these elderly waivers to almost 19,000 now. There are just more people getting old. And to pretend that we're somehow, not going to, be dealing with this for the next decade is fictitious. And to cut. To turn our back on federal money when we send more money to Washington than we get back and jeopardize the financial stability of hospitals and providers, doctors around the state is I think, just senseless.
Speaking of getting old, President Obama recently said that he had a living will. Do any of you have a living will?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Why not?
Why? I don't have one.
Okay. How should people deal with end-of-life issues? Do you have strong opinions on who should decide when life ends?
I think they should. But I want to go back to this stuff, and I thought you were going to give me an opportunity because, Senator Dayton, it's just patently false when you suggest that the governor and the legislature have been trying to squeeze nursing homes. In fact, there's a letter that I signed on to with several of my colleagues that we're asking to increase funding to nursing homes. We've tried to do it several times over the last 6 years. And then, Mr. Horner, you can keep talking about all these investments, but you know what? You aren't changing a thing when it comes to health care. In fact, we were at a debate the other night where you suggested the doctors, who frankly are really suffering because they haven't had Medicare, Medicaid reimbursements adjusted in years. Many of them are providing services at below cost. And to suggest that we're just going to opt into every program that comes in that would continue that type of treatment of our physicians is not going to promote, number one, great high-quality care at low cost, but more importantly, it's not going to promote the next generation of physicians, which we absolutely have to be concerned about here in the state of Minnesota.
And if that's what we're proposing, Representative Emmer, I would agree with you that I would be wrong. Fortunately, I don't have to make that acknowledgement because that's not what I'm proposing. I do think we ought to take the opt-in to Medicaid because it can save money, it can provide better health care, it can lead us to a path of reform. And we have done a good job in Minnesota. We are starting the path of coordinating care for those with chronic conditions. We are starting on the path of paying for quality, not just for quantity. But I believe we also need to keep on the path of investing in prevention, of spending money to help people stay healthy, because that has a long-term benefit. But we also, I just want to reject, are you really saying that the legislative actions and the governor over the last 6 years have not reduced reimbursements for nursing homes, for providers?
What I'm saying is that we have fought for more increases for nursing homes. And frankly, Tom, I'll tell you what, if we're in the governor's office, I've put it in a budget, which you have not. You talk about...
You don't have money in there for increases?
Respectfully, if you would tell Minnesota what you're actually going to raise in terms of taxes, and you will tell Minnesota what you're going to cut. What we've talked about is increasing the Health and Human Services budget, and we are talking about nursing homes, seniors, vulnerable adults.
You two, it can't be just the two of yours
No, but I
debate.
understand. But when you say increase your budget by $650 million,
Yeah.
is that right? That doesn't even cover the cost of the cuts that have already been made.
Let's come back to the question.
GMC
Senator
and other
Dayton, you said
areas.
you had a living will. Let's talk about end-of-life issues. Who should decide on end-of-life?
Well, my two sons are in my living will to make those decisions, and these are very difficult and painful decisions. I think those are best left to the individual and his or her family and physician and faith.
Mr. Horner, living will, who should decide on end-of-life
Oh,
issues,
I think
especially
that-
if you can't?
Well, but that's why you do a living will, is so
Right.
that you prepare for those circumstances. That's
But
why
not
you
everybody's
plan
doing them.
That's why you plan ahead. I think it ought to be with the family, and that it ought to be a collective decision, and ideally it ought to be done while everybody is healthy and has their faculties and can make a good judgment.
Okay.
But look, I also believe that is a role for physicians to help counsel, to understand what the decisions are, not to move you in one direction or another, but these are complicated issues, and not everybody understands what do heroic measures mean. And so we ought to have that kind of a discussion. And so I would hope that as we get more sophisticated, as we take some of the politics out of these issues, that we can ask doctors and reimburse doctors to help lead people through these kinds of conversations.
Okay, a lot of these issues, healthcare, bonding bills, the budgets, are going to take work with the legislature, and it very likely is going to take bipartisan votes. You're going to have to shore up support in the legislature. Let's talk about how each of you can cross partisan lines. We've heard some of our citizens saying, nonpartisan, want you to cross partisan lines. Senator Dayton, since you had to run against the Speaker of the House, it was a little bit more challenging for you to get legislative support. Talk about how you're going to shore up Democrats and also Republicans and get their support for your plan.
My 6 years in the U.S. Senate, I worked with a Republican president and a Republican majority in the Senate for 4.5 of those 6 years. And last year, for example, I worked with Senator John McCain and with then the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Ted Stevens, may he rest in peace, to get the first congressional funding for a program Beyond the Yellow Ribbon.
And how about the
pioneering
state
program of the
legislature?
Minnesota National Guard.
Are you reaching out to state lawmakers now?
9 years heading 3 different state agencies. I'm the one who's led a state agency, served in the executive branch of state government, and I worked with the legislatures under DFL.
A lot of those lawmakers aren't around now,
and
though.
Also the House was Republican during a couple of those years. And I prided myself on working with everyone who can work with me. I think you treat people respectfully, civilly. They're elected each in their own right, and we'll have honest disagreements. But I've always treated people in government with respect, as honest and honorable people as they are. And that's the great thing about democracy, is that we have different points of view and perspectives. It's the countries that only have one political party or one candidate to choose from have much worse governance than we have in our state of Minnesota. And we have, fortunately, bipartisan, tripartisan, nonpartisan. We have a high quality of government, people in government and in the legislature. And I look forward to working with them if I'm governor.
Are you winning over legislators? You recently had a meeting with a few who needed to be converted, right?
Yeah, no, we're all on the same team. We're a united DFL party. We have a strong effort underway, and some of them may have different points of view, and that's to be respected and honored and welcomed.
Okay, Representative Emmer, tell me how you're going to work, not just across the aisle with Democrats, but also with your own party. You ran for leader of your party, were not elected, so there's still some frayed relationships with fellow Republicans. Even when your caucus went to see the governor, you did not follow along and visit some of those governor meetings. Would you be upset if Republicans didn't show up at your office if you were governor?
Well, Mary, I think you're creating things where nothing exists. I mean, I've got great relationships with people on both sides of the aisle.
But you did skip some meetings that your caucus attended with the governor.
That 50% of the caucus is not at. I'm not sure why you decided to keep track of where I was when there are several other people in the caucus. It's nice to have your attention. But I think it's being proactive. It's being clear and honest about what you propose to do, and then being consistent all the way through. You got to get respect of your colleagues. You also have to, they may not agree with you, but as long as they know that what you say you mean, it makes it a lot easier to work together. And then I would also suggest, I put out a jobs creation agenda, which has not been enacted, contrary to what my colleague has suggested, that we need to do in the state of Minnesota, create jobs. And guess what? The things that I've proposed in my budget proposal and job creation proposal, maybe not the budget itself, because that's going to cause a lot of work by a lot of people living within our means, making sure the government lives within its means. But the job creation agenda has been supported by Republicans and Democrats alike at different votes in the legislature. I'll tell you right now, Senator Dayton's Tax the Rich proposal had 7 votes in the Minnesota House. And Tom Horner, your sales tax proposal, you might find 1 or 2 votes in the House, but I challenge you to find 20 people who would actually support that. So it's not just being proactive in terms of working with people, this is what we need to do and why, but it's about being clear and honest about what you propose to do, and then listen to them, work with them, and put out things that they'll agree on.
Tom Horner, how do you reach out? Because some Republicans, since you're a former Republican, might be a little steamed at you for leaving the party. And we watched Jesse Ventura struggle to work with lawmakers and create that relationship.
Only in the last 2 years. The first 2 years, he was very successful, frankly.
Right, but when his popularity ratings went down, lawmakers weren't interested in him anymore.
When he started to do some things that maybe opened the door to that. So, look, I think all of that starts actually in the kind of campaign you run, in how you treat your fellow candidates, in the respect that you have for the public. And so I'm the candidate that has said, I will not run any negative advertising in my campaign, not a single ad, and I will abide by that, even though as I gain momentum, you can imagine that the attack ads are going to come from the independent expenditure groups. They'll come. I'm going to keep it a positive campaign. I think that sets a tone that allows me then to go into the governor's office to appoint the kind of cabinet that a Jesse Ventura had that reflects a broad cross-section of Minnesota, who are the best and the brightest, who are there not because I owe a special favor to this group or that group, but because they know how to get the job done. But beyond that, Mary, when you look at the kinds of proposals that I have put out, the Senate tax leadership, Senator Bach, Senator Rest, some of the most respected Democratic members on taxes have said sales tax is the way to go. When you look at editorials around the state, Mankato, they've said my budget is the best. Art Roenick, the most respected Federal Reserve economist, looked at the 3 budgets, said mine was the best. Former Governor Arne Carlson. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, where people around the state from both parties and objective observers are saying, it's my leadership, it's my vision, it's my proposal that represents the best interests of Minnesota, because what I'm saying is we can't just put all of the burden on the poor, and we can't just put all of the burden on the wealthy. We have to have a budget that works for all Minnesotans. We're all in this together, and we all have to share.
Can you get income taxes?
Well, the best thing about an election is that each Minnesotan gets to decide for himself or herself which of our budget proposals is in their best interest. And I'll rest on that verdict. And I think the one reason that I won the primary is because people recognized that I was going to protect the middle class from tax increases. And they've seen the property taxes, as I said earlier, the most unfair tax, despite this no new tax mantra of the last years, go up from $4 billion when Governor Plenty took office to $7 billion. And it's because people have passed the buck. It's easier to say, okay, well, we're not going to make those tough decisions at the state level. We'll just let local governments, school board members and city council members, county commissioners, who have also cut. But that's why the Department of Revenue says if you cut $1 of the local assistance and school assistance, property taxes go up, the most unfair tax. That's why I think people recognize that mine protects the middle class and others do not.
Okay, final pitch here. You have about 1 minute each. We heard somebody in the tape there talk about vision and leadership. Tell us how your leadership style is going to be different and the best, especially for folks over 50. Representative Emmer.
Well, you have a choice. November 2nd will be a choice. It'll be a choice between doing what Minnesota has been doing over the last several decades that these 2 gentlemen offer, which simply is we're going to continue to raise taxes. That's the answer. It doesn't matter from where. We're going to raise taxes. We're going to continue to feed government. And we need something new. We need to have government be more efficient and deliver the services people expect in an affordable and sustainable manner. But then more importantly, to do all the wonderful things that people in Minnesota have come to expect, we got to start growing jobs in the private sector again. We got to put Minnesota back to work, because that is what ultimately will fund our nursing homes and fund all the different programs that we expect Minnesota to pay for.
Tom Horner, your final pitch.
Well, so I think this campaign is about leadership. And my vision for Minnesota is a state that says to all Minnesotans, look, we have a big hole that was left to us. We haven't even talked about the problem of public pensions, of underfunded infrastructure. It's not just the $6 billion shortfall, it's all of these shortfalls that we have to deal with. We better be investing in the future, in creating opportunity, and you don't do that just by cutting back on education, on health care, on research. You do it by making smart decisions, by investing for the future. And so my pitch is that if Minnesotans want bold leadership in the governor's office in January of 2011, it only starts with bold leadership by voters on November 2nd.
Senator Dayton.
I think seniors remember that I've devoted 35 years of my life to public service in Minnesota, and that they remember that I donated my Senate salary to the Minnesota Senior Federation to support bus trips of seniors to Canada where they could buy much lower cost prescription drugs. That in the U.S. Senate, I fought to close the donut hole, which unfairly penalizes our seniors and burdens them, especially those on limited and fixed incomes, with those unnecessarily higher prescription drug costs. And they care about their children and grandchildren and their future, which is why my commitment to education, increasing funding for public K-12 education, supporting early childhood education, recognition that our young people are our future, and they'll also provide the support for those in their retirement years to live in secure retirement income and healthy lives.
We have 1 quick minute to do one last question. How long do you each want to serve? More than a term?
We're running for a 4-year term.
You want to serve more than one 4-year term?
I don't have a living will. I got to take it one day at a time.
Okay.
I said that I'll go in, I'll be the political lightning rod, I'll take the hits, we'll bring Democrats and Republicans together, I'll give them cover. I would never make a pledge to be a one-term governor, but if the consequences of doing the right things cause me not to be reelected, I'm okay with that.
How many terms?
Good Lord, if the people of Minnesota willing, I'd serve 2 terms. It'll take that long to straighten out the mess we're in today and create a better Minnesota.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. We're very glad you joined us tonight for this conversation with candidates for governor. Special thanks to our partner in this debate, AARP. We remind you to register to vote. Election day is Tuesday, November 2nd. And to rewatch this debate and learn more information on this year's governor race, you can head to our website. That's tpt.org. Again, tpt.org. Thanks again for tuning in tonight. Good night.